This is Matthew Cratter from Trade University, and today I want to talk about the EU and why I think that the whole project is doomed. This video is being made at the request of a lot of my European viewers and subscribers who've asked me to focus a little bit more on Europe, and I know that I do have a very US-based focus. This is because it's really for two reasons. First of all, it's where I live. It's the country that I understand the best. The second reason, of course, is that the US dollar is still the global reserve currency, and when the Fed catches cold, or when the Fed sneezes, the whole world catches cold, as we're seeing. And so it's very important to understand Federal Reserve policy and US politics if you're going to understand what's happening with the financial markets. But it is quite important as well to focus on the EU bloc. I should say as a preface, I have many European friends. I've spent a lot of time in Europe over the years, and I do love Europe. I love its history. I love its architecture and literature, etc. And the people of Europe. I just hope that I'm wrong about the predictions that follow here. So none of this is meant to be alarmist, and there's certainly zero schadenfreude on my side here. But I think that there is a fundamental structural problem with the whole EU project. So let's start with Germany, which is really the heart of the EU, especially in terms of its economy. Germany is highly reliant on cheap Russian energy, as we know, not just for its citizens and for keeping houses warm in the winter, but also for its industrial production. The most recent numbers I could find, 32% of the natural gas, pipeline gas in Germany comes from Russia. 34% of its crude oil comes from Russia, or at least did before the invasion, before Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. 53% of the coal in Germany comes, or the hard coal in Germany comes from Russia. So this shows how highly dependent Germany has been on Russia. This is the article that I'll link to where I got those statistics from. But we're at this point, obviously, because of the invasion, that the EU is pushing really hard to try to ban Russian energy imports, which makes sense. If you're mad at Russia, you don't want to exactly be funding its war efforts. This is also what the US wants the EU to do, and for the most part, the EU follows along with what the world's superpower, the US, or I should say, the world's declining superpower, wants the EU to do. Here's the problem, though. It's easy for the U.S. to try to ban Russian energy because we're much more self-sufficient than Europe. But pushing this policy on the EU is quite dangerous. It's extremely dangerous. If the EU bans Russian energy, not only will the inhabitants of the EU suffer from the cold winters and hot summers because of the higher electricity costs and the higher heating costs, but its industries will face much, much higher energy input costs as well. So the EU could replace all of its crude oil and coal and natural gas that it gets from Russia with US crude oil, coal, and natural gas, but it's obviously going to be much more expensive to get it over the pond. So this would make German industries, in particular French industries, Italian industries as well. I'm really focused on Germany here, though. It would make these industries much less cost competitive in the global market. Germany has a very high-end manufacturing base, but they still do compete with powerhouses, manufacturing powerhouses like China, for example. So if the input costs, the energy input costs, begin to hurt German industrial production, and German industrial production falls, you've just really killed the engine at the center of the EU. And to a lesser extent, this would happen in France, in Spain, and Italy as well. If you're finding this video helpful so far, be sure to hit that subscribe and like button. Maybe share this video with a few friends as well. According to this German website, Germany makes up 25% of the total share of GDP of the EU. France here is at 17%, Italy at 12%. Germany also has the largest share of the total population of the EU at 19%. So this is one reason we're focused on Germany. Now, the EU has not been and has never been and still is not a stable structure. It almost completely broke down in 2011 and 2012 as sort of an echo effect of the great financial crisis. And it was really saved by this man, Mario Draghi, who's now the Prime Minister of Italy. In a previous incarnation, he was president of the ECB, the European Central Bank, from 2011 until 2019. And he's the one who's widely credited with saving the EU in 2012 when he made this speech in which he said, within our mandate, the ECB is ready to do whatever it takes to preserve the euro, and believe me, it will be enough. And this phrase, whatever it takes, really did calm down the markets. The way the ECB did this, the way Draghi did it, is basically the European Central Bank printed a lot of money and then bought government bonds from all the EU members that were quite weak, where the interest rates were spiking, where the economies were slowing. Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain. The acronym for this was PIGS, which is not a very nice thing to say, but it is what it was referred to in the financial press. And so you had the ECB buying the bonds from these various EU members, forcing their interest rates back down and preserving the union. And it did work in 2012. This sort of policy works when inflation is low and when it's being kept low by cheap Russian energy imports. And this is the whole irony of the whole European project, resting on the good graces of the Russians. But now we're in a very different environment where German inflation is hitting a 40-year high. We're already having an energy supply shock and all the ripple effects of the Russian invasion. And so it's a very different point in time than it was, and inflation's at a very different level than it was back in 2012 when the ECB and Draghi promised to do whatever it takes. So what happens when the cheap energy stops? And in a sense, it's already stopped. If there's a full EU ban of Russian energy imports, then it's really, really stopped. What's going to happen then? Well, the ECB, the European Central Bank, can keep printing money and buying bonds, keep buying those Italian and Portuguese and Spanish and Greek bonds. The problem is that money printing up fresh euros to do this will cause even more inflation when inflation is at 40-year highs. If you end up with too much inflation, particularly in the food sector or the energy sector, and obviously energy is a big input to food production and distribution, you end up with rioting, you end up with social unrest, and ultimately possibly even some sort of revolution or threat to the governments of Europe. If the ECB stops printing money, though, and stops buying these bonds, then these same countries, and probably there are a few that I'm missing here, but the big ones, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, are in big trouble, and they may be forced to abandon the euro and go back to their old local currencies because they're basically being propped up still by ECB bond buying. So at that point, if the pigs leave the EU, at that point, the EU is finished. And it's not just finished because they've lost 4 large, important members, but also because if this happens and the pig countries go back to their local currencies, then you have a really big problem with German and French banks who have lent these countries and corporations within those countries a lot of money, and they've lent it to them in euros. If these countries exit the euro and go back to their own currencies, the value of those loans will plummet, and it has the potential to completely blow up the whole European banking system, as it almost happened in 2012, but this time it would be for real. If the EU tried to step in and keep printing money, and assuming that Russian energy gets canceled as well, then inflation is going to increase sharply. That combination of money printing and energy inputs, inflation will increase sharply from already 40-year high levels. German industrial production will suffer. They're not going to be able to produce goods at nearly at competitive prices with their energy inputs going up. And you're going to end up with a deep recession in Germany and probably stagflation as a result all over the EU. At this point, when there's enough social distress, the European populace will get fed up, and these individual member countries will begin to elect demagogic leaders that promise to focus on the local economies and kick out Southern European members from the EU. So either way, if the ECB doesn't print money, the pigs countries may be forced to exit the euro. If they keep printing money, there's going to be huge political pressure to tamp down inflation and kick out and stop subsidizing these Southern European members of the EU. Here's my prediction. The EU will no longer exist by the end of this decade. And it's probably, I'd be surprised actually if it lasts another 5 years. I think what Putin has done here has really accelerated the decline of the EU. So if you live in Europe, if you live in the EU, this really should be on your radar. Again, I don't live in Europe now, and so I can't tell you exactly what it means for you and for your individual country. But you should think through what it would mean for your job, for your finances, especially if you're in one of the PIGS countries and they return to go back to the Italian lira or the French franc. This should be French franc, or the Deutschmark, or the drachma, etc. So as I've been saying, this is not just a turbulent decade for the U.S. and for Asia. This is going to be a very difficult and turbulent decade. Probably the most crazy decade that we've seen in the last 80 years. And the start of this decade certainly proved that to be true. Here's my hypothesis, that the EU project is impossible without Russia's cheap energy. This is one of the great ironies of European and EU energy policy over the past few years. A lot of virtue signaling. You can virtue signal as much as you want, but eventually economic reality hits. And there's a very good chance that if the EU goes through and cancels Russia's cheap energy imports, this will accelerate the demise of the EU much more quickly than it would have already, the path that it would have taken otherwise. I think Putin is quite aware of this. He's a very savvy economic actor, and I think he realized that even if he failed with his invasion, there would be domino effects that would hurt a lot of people that he wanted to hurt. Meanwhile, there's going to be a ton of pressure on the ECB. Christine Lagarde, instead of worrying about Bitcoin and talking about its funny business, she should be very worried about what is coming. Obviously, Bitcoin's going to do extremely well in euro terms, in US dollar terms, in renminbi terms. It's going to do well in all of these currency terms as we enter a hyperinflationary decade, really, for the world. And I've shown you reasons in my other videos why the US dollar is doomed. We see now that the euro as a project is almost certainly doomed as well. So to the extent you can diversify into hard assets and into digital hard assets like Bitcoin, I think you'll be much better protected in the coming decade when the EU finally breaks up. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe and like button. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.